Welcome back. We are on, believe it or not, episode 7 of our new series.
We're on 6.
We're on 6. Sorry. I even changed it to
believe
6.
Believe it or not, I don't believe it.
7.
We're on 6.
Anyway. Good. The series is called The World at the End of Your Driveway. Jay, what's our series all about?
Well, it's really about mission and the idea of how to respond to that. And really the idea is, like, sometimes I think we've made mission really about just getting to the person who we want. We want everyone to be a follower of Jesus. We think he's that amazing, but it's really all about just getting as fast as you can to the say yes in prayer or whatever moment, saying the right thing through some sort of apologetic juncture, and just the idea of how do we do this with the idea of, and I love this, the anchor of loving your neighbor.
Sure. Great. So today we're going to be talking about hospitality as a possible method for telling others about why we follow Jesus. So in 1 Peter, we read, this is 1 Peter 3, 15 and 16. And if someone asks about your hope as a believer, always be ready to explain it. But do this in a gentle and respectful way. But notice how the verse says, when you are asked. Mm-hmm. So my question is, how do you get to the point where you have an opportunity where your friends will actually ask you about the good news of Jesus? And again, most of us never try, as it sounds really daunting, or we wouldn't even know where to start, kind of thing, or we've had a bad experience.
Yeah. Well, and like we've talked about in kind of earlier things on this, it's the idea, again, and I love how it's kind of even breaking down, like when asked, and if, someone asks. I like that sort of thing. It's not us manipulating the situation in order to be asked. It's just, and a lot of this, I think what we'll cover today is just, there's a lot of that hopefully through the natural progression of friendship, you will be asked.
Yeah, and that's what we'll explore today. Yeah. So, now, again, as I've said, hospitality itself can be seen as a big problem. So how do you tackle a big problem? Well, you break it into smaller steps. Mm. And I don't know if mentioning IKEA is a good thing or not, but my inclination when I get something from IKEA is to try and put it together on my own without following the instructions. That never ends well. However, when I do follow the instructions step by step, I usually end up with the finished piece that I was hoping for, and that's come from a pile of boards and screws. So if we are going to break today we're going to talk about breaking hospitality down into 3 smaller steps: coffee, dinner, and then the gospel. Mm. So coffee leads to dinner, and then dinner leads to the gospel. We'll explain how that works in just a minute. So hospitality gives us the space and permission for conversations to occur. I'm going to talk about 3 levels or layers of conversation today. There's coffee, where we talk about interests, which is usually a fairly shallow conversation. Once we've determined some compatibility, we can move on to a dinner where that's where we talk about values, so it's a slightly deeper conversation. And then once we've established trust, you can feel safe to talk about your worldview, which is your most vulnerable,
the deeper stuff,
the real you kind of thing, and that will lead to opportunities for the gospel. So let's take a closer look at each step, and we'll see how that fits together.
All right, let's start with step 1. The idea of inviting someone to have coffee, or I guess, and this is kind of more metaphorical than necessarily literal. You don't. It could be just for a walk, whatever it is. But the idea of coffee.
Yeah, and I mean, coffee is a relatively low-risk thing to ask. It's low risk for both parties. It's easy to say yes to. It's usually a fairly short time investment, 10 to 30 minutes kind of thing. It's usually in a public place, so it's not going to get too uncomfortable. And then if things don't work out, well, there's very little that's actually lost.
That's right. Yeah, and really the whole idea is to get to know each other. This is where you might find things that are just, common. Yeah. It's just, you start small talk stuff, what you do on the weekend, weather, maybe what you're watching on TV, just those basic interests stuff.
Just to see if friendship is possible.
Yeah. And yes, you may not be thinking in that sense, is friendship possible? Do you like, oh, you don't? Friendship is no longer possible. It is just, but you will, that natural feeling of just like where, things overlap, essentially, whatever that might look like.
Then conversation can go to, or could progress to your work and or family. And then we usually get to, after that, to interests, what sports teams you cheer for, crafts and hobbies, social causes. I have a friend who's very passionate about serving on the community association board. So, and usually conversations at this level are descriptive. So they describe factual statements that are relatively easy to identify. So I have a friend who's a Detroit Red Wings fan.
Right.
It's fairly easy to identify when I go to his house and I walk into his basement. There's Red Wing curtains, Red Wing clock. The whole room is decorated in red. It's very obvious and easy to identify that he's a Red Wings fan.
Right. Yeah, so, and for me, it's usually a lot of friends. It's usually has to do with music, and so usually tell you sort of like it's very easy to sort of like they like music, or even certain bands. Yeah. That kind of the same idea. But yes, it's very easily out there.
Yeah, exactly.
It's not. You don't have to do a whole lot of digging to find these facts out about people.
Yeah, and usually there's not a huge chance of disagreement here. You're just sort of getting to know each other, and if they cheer for someone who you don't cheer for, it's usually not.
I'm going to say that. Yeah, tell that to a Red Wings fan that you cheer for someone else. I'm like, yeah.
Well, if they don't know you very well, they're not going to maybe stick up for them the way they would if they knew you a little better. True enough. Which really gets into step 2. So, again, if things go well at this stage, you'll probably meet again, or you can ask to meet again, and it may take several coffee meetings, and again, metaphorically, before you progress to step 2. Step 2 is a progression to asking someone to go out for dinner. So this is a much bigger ask because it's more expensive for one, and 2, it's more of a time commitment.
Yeah, as before we talked about coffee, the 10 to 30 minutes. Like I would think with a dinner, you're probably looking at to a minimum an hour.
A minimum, yeah, an hour to 90 minutes or 2 if things go well. And I would say if you're meeting in your home or a restaurant, it's probably more private.
Yeah, what do you mean by more private? Because I mean, I guess if we're talking the idea of these metaphors of a coffee shop or coffee shop or a restaurant, I mean, those are both very public places.
Yeah, I would say maybe I mean more intimate in a restaurant in that usually for dinner you're sitting at a table of 4 where you look at each other, where at a coffee shop you could be beside each other. You could be at a table for 2 with 2 other groups of table for 2 within spitting distance.
Oh, sure, yeah.
Kind of thing. So it doesn't always
There's
feel
more space in the restaurant.
Yeah. So it feels maybe more private. And you can have a more intimate conversation. So at this stage, conversation will progress from interests to values. And this is what we're talking about with the sports thing here. And these are statements about preferences, ethics, values, and beauty. So you might think that chocolate is better than vanilla, or what movies you prefer or hate.
Oh, yeah.
Do you like action movies? I like action movies. I'm not really fond of rom-coms. I will watch them because my wife likes them. Where you might send your kids to school, your favorite sports team, and why. Some people prefer football over hockey, or I guess that's blasphemy if you live in Canada. But this is where we were getting down to the favorite sports team. At this stage, your friendship has developed a little bit, and there may be some friendly or even not so friendly rivalry that can happen here. Again, statements in this layer of conversations are prescriptive, so claims that are a little more difficult to verify immediately, and there's also a higher chance of disagreement. I know I recently watched the movie Otto, and Tom Hanks does a good job playing the role. And in that particular movie, he's a Chevrolet guy, and the guy he's trying to be friends with is a Ford guy. And they kind of poke fun at it as they age, and their friendship is deepening. But at one point, the guy who's been devoted to Ford all his life switches to Toyota. And Otto just can't stand that. He can almost understand why you could be loyal to a brand your whole life, but to switch brands in midlife was just unbearable to him, and their friendship was over, kind of thing. So it's just it's conflicting views at this point may put your friendship at stake. Is all I'm trying to say.
Right.
But I do believe that if you can show that it is safe to express yourself, even if you do disagree, and you're vulnerable, and yet the other person that you're talking to feels like they're being heard, even if you disagree, then I think your friendship can actually evolve and deepen.
Yeah, so I guess this is where we can really start this. I mean, even though we're always want to be doing this, but practicing deeper the active listening idea.
Yeah, this is really important at this stage, is to really be listening to the other person with the goal of understanding them.
And this is the part where I can start to get maybe a little more difficult to do that, because we're moving into the ideas of values and things like that. We might have a conflicting value we're ready to share right away.
Yeah.
When all that sort of stuff, and as opposed to, this is again why I think active listening really comes to a head at this point, is because it is the idea, like, I need to ask questions and not just voice my opposite view, or the team that I think is better than the team you just talked about, and why I don't like the team you like, or something like that.
Exactly. So there's 3 sort of levels to that. The first one is we can be listening to somebody but not really listening. We're just waiting for our turn to talk.
Yeah.
The team thing.
Yeah.
Other times, if it's more argumentative, where we're debating something, we can not really be listening, but it looks like we're listening, but we're really just preparing on how we're going to respond. And it could be formulating a counterpoint, or even determining what kind of advice to give. And again, that's not really listening. Active listening is really just listening to them talk without any agenda other than to really understand what they're saying.
Yeah, that is the ultimate goal.
So when you disagree, it can be helpful to ask questions like, tell me about that, or how did that make you feel, or help me understand what you're saying. This gives the other person permission to continue talking.
Yeah.
And then again, we're just trying to listen and understand their point of view.
Well, and this is a great time to really practice logic.
Yep.
And it's really important. You're not trying to insert your logic into their thing. You're trying to discover theirs, because usually that's when you see the patterns of, like, oh, I see where you've come to this conclusion, and you may disagree with the conclusion, but if your goal is to just find the pattern of their journey,
that's
what you want to do.
And I mean, this is also the stage where people will probably find out that you follow Jesus and participate in a church community without really necessarily knowing what you believe per se. It probably will just come up in conversation. Again, that's a step 3 step when we're actually determining.
But some of that foundation is being laid.
Is
here.
laid at this point. Yeah. So this is a stage where friendships are developed. And it's likely that if it does, you will get a chance to spend more time with your new friend. And if you have something in common, like a love of sports or hobbies or books or movies, or music, then you'll be able to spend time enjoying those activities together. And again, as we've said many times, friendship takes presence, that's being together, and time to develop.
And it's really important that, sometimes relationships just don't work out.
Yeah, it's true.
And like
it's okay.
Yeah, like I think there's whether it's comes to trust issues or compatibility.
Yeah.
There's just whatever. Just they mean nothing, but just misses.
Yeah.
Like you just like, oh, for whatever reason this
didn't work out.
Like it's just, and that happens. So there's nothing wrong with that.
And sometimes you just it doesn't develop into a friendship, but you can still be friendly towards a person.
Absolutely.
And that's okay. But I think if you do get the chance and it does progress to step 3, this is where friendship builds trust. And eventually the conversation will deepen and you will find out what the other person's worldview is. And now these are statements about what we believe. These are the frameworks for how we view the world. Worldviews are the drivers of our values. That's the step 2 stuff. And our worldviews shape how we understand facts, perceive evidence, process data, and interpret our personal experiences. So everything that's kind of happened to us in the past, things that we've learned from our parents or teachers or friends, sort of form who we've become.
Right.
And that will form how we develop our values. But again, like you said, it's connecting the dots through conversation of how you got there.
Yeah.
Now, just a little note here. Some people may not have ever had a friendship where they've or they've gotten to step 3 where they're discussing worldviews.
True.
And in that case, you can actually prompt worldview discussion by asking questions. So again, you're not trying to manipulate, you're just trying to nudge your friendship a little bit deeper. So just as an example, if you ask someone what they did on the weekend, that's a step one
Right.
conversation. What did you do this weekend? They said, well, I played pickleball. And you can ask them a values-based question, a step two question. Well, why do you like playing pickleball? And then if they might respond that they do it to stay healthy. And then we can go to more of a worldview question, which is, why do you value health so much? And so those are just, if we keep in mind, and we're going to discuss questions a little more detail here, but we can ask questions about a person's dreams and hopes and goals or ambitions. And at this point, sometimes if they're not ready to talk about it yet, they may laugh it off or change the subject or
Sure.
just say they don't know. It probably means that they're not ready for that conversation yet in their relationship. You might be, but they may not be. So that's okay. Just be patient.
Yeah, and I think when we get into this level, it's or this area, it's the idea. Safety is a huge thing there, and first thing is that doesn't mean that somehow you've done something necessarily that it made them feel unsafe. It's a vulnerable moment.
Yeah.
And we can think of our times and the friends that we've had. And maybe sometimes it's really great to look at our own relationships, whatever they look like, and just notice how, the moment where you've maybe moved to this step 3
Sure.
with friends, and to realize, oh yeah, there was a moment that even though we were friendly and even friends, there was a time when I would not have shared some of that stuff with
exactly.
that person. And because sometimes I know I can forget that. Even we can talk about doing that with our wives.
Yeah.
That time that when we realize, like, oh, when did that switch where I would share this?
Yeah.
And sometimes it's good to go back on that. There was a moment where I just felt safe in this relationship to share all that. And maybe it wasn't one thing. It's usually a collection of things.
Yeah. And if they do respond with detailed and thoughtful answers, then we can follow up with, why is that important to you? Or what will you do if things don't work out the way you want them to? And their answers will reveal a lot about their worldviews. So this is the step where you're most likely to have a chance to talk about why you follow Jesus. And again, it doesn't have to be forced, and we would suggest never forcing it. It will be natural and organic because you're discussing worldviews. And again, if your worldviews are shaped by Jesus, that will come out in your conversation. Now, some people might be uncomfortable talking about what they consider religion with you, so you may have to nudge the conversation in that direction, again, with questions. And again, not to manipulate, we're just trying to explore people's worldviews. So you could ask questions like, what do you believe about God? Or what do you think God wants from you? Did you grow up with faith or religion? What faith do you have now because of that? Some people have none. They've chosen to walk away from it. Others will have chosen a different faith because they didn't like the one they grew up with. And some just have no faith. And you can ask questions like, do you pray? If it comes out that they have a different religion, so, ask them questions like, what's the best thing about being a Buddhist or a Muslim or a Wiccan? Tell me about your traditions or festivals or celebrations and why they're important to you. And then I really like this question. Again, these come from a book called How to Talk About Jesus Without Being That Guy by Sam Chan. And this question I thought was really good. What do people get wrong about your religion?
It's a good question.
And again, at this point, we're not trying to debate anybody or talk about the gospel. We're just trying to ask questions with the purpose of learning, of listening and understanding.
And I think it's really important too, because I know when I read these questions out of context, I think like, what's going to happen? How do I fit this in? It seems so unnatural.
Yeah.
And it really is. Like, all these questions aren't necessarily like, you got to get to these questions.
Yeah.
They're more just hopefully helpful things of like, hey, I've never thought of asking a question
like
before.
that.
And to remember that, whenever I've been in a situation where I've come to a place to ask this question, I've definitely done it where I forced it in. Not the greatest. But when you built that friendship, it's surprising how less awkward. I'm not gonna say it's never not awkward, but less awkward. Like, it just like, it really, there are times it's surprisingly open to this. And so I do really want to encourage everyone just to know that, like, you may be surprised how natural these things can come up, even though as we talk about it this way, it may not sound that much so.
Yeah, I get sometimes get quite alarmed looks when obviously we're just talking about work and I find out that I'm a pastor.
Yeah.
So I like to follow up with that question. So did you grow up with any faith? Because then it sort of deflects it away from me and lets them explain to me what, if any, they grew up with. And again, that may or may not be a point of further conversation. Sometimes it just stops there, and that's okay.
Yeah.
Other times it has, for me, it's opened up a chance to explore it further. So now, again, in our culture, there's sort of this social convention of reciprocity. So many times if you give them a chance to talk first and actually feel like they're being heard, they may ask you back the same questions. If you let them tell you what they believe, then they may ask you what you believe, and then you will have a chance to talk about the gospel.
Right.
And again, the same thing can happen here, even more in a more dramatic way, is that if your worldviews are very different, the other person may not be willing to continue friendship and disconnect entirely. And again, that's not up to you. I will say, though, that if you've gotten over sort of the hurdle of disagreement in step 2 and you're at this sort of deeper level, I think it's important for us not to do the same thing. Right. If we disconnect at this point just because they don't follow Jesus, I think they'll feel used or like we were out on some mission to convert them or something.
Yeah.
And I think it's important for us to keep the friendship intact and just trust the Holy Spirit to draw that person to Jesus, and then just be available if there's a chance to talk about whatever comes up again.
All right. So, maybe just some final thoughts.
Final thoughts here. One is pay attention to your conversations. I know that sometimes people will want to talk about something and they'll bring it up casually in a conversation, hoping you will ask about it. So pay attention to things that come up more than once over the course of a conversation. I know in the book, Sam talks about a friend that his mother was sick and brought it up in conversation 2 or 3 times, and he missed it entirely. And his wife said, your friend brought up that his mother was sick 3 times in the conversation. Think he wanted to talk about that? And he was like,
yeah.
Kind of thing. The other thing that you mentioned sort of at the outset was sometimes you have to get creative with hospitality.
Yeah.
It isn't just coffee and dinner kind of thing.
Yeah.
We may have to find different points of connection before we can even get to sort of like a coffee. So coworkers and neighbors are a great place to start with just because of proximity. So if you see your neighbor outside, make a point of going out and starting a conversation. If they're cutting their grass, go out and cut your grass. And gives an opportunity to make a connection. If you're at work, maybe bring donuts or snacks to the meeting or whatever. And people, even when they just thank you for bringing donuts, gives you an opportunity to talk. So there's different things like that. You could join a club or a sports team, invite someone to go with you to the movies. I mean, our church does a potluck dinner once a month, and that's a great opportunity for our community to invite other people not from our community to our potluck dinner. And that's been a great way for us to
Very much so.
sort of connect with the community. Sam Chan in the book says, hospitality is costly. It costs time, effort, and money. It's a form of generosity. But hospitality earns us social capital. It allows us to earn our friends' trust so we can talk about things that matter. So I think hospitality, when we think of it in that way, is a wonderful way for us to connect with people who don't follow Jesus.
Right. Yeah, and as you said before, it can lead to I'm sure I'm going to say that right. Reciprocity.
Yeah, there we go.
Right. I guess it took a while to spit that out. In that, it allows them to reciprocate in conversation, in social surroundings, and all that sort of. It just that can easily lead to whatever that first coffee might be together, or something like that.
And again, this. Just a warning here, this is not a short-term strategy. I know when I was growing up, everything we learned about witnessing or evangelism was short-term strategies.
Yeah.
We go out and knock on doors. We have a convention. We invite a speaker, something where people raised their hand and went and said a prayer, and there was instant gratification because we felt like people were becoming followers of Jesus. But it also felt like you could never do it by yourself or on your own.
Yeah.
And so I think making yourself available in this way through hospitality, just from my own experience, I guarantee the Holy Spirit will create opportunities for you to talk about why you follow Jesus, and you'll even make some great friends along the way.
Yeah, and I think one of the things we've talked about throughout this series a lot is about the idea of loving your neighbor is the anchor, and we talk a lot about listening throughout this. I mean, if there's a common thread that we can weave throughout this this whole series, and like if you could forget almost anything we say beyond this, listening. When we truly listen to people and they feel heard, they feel loved.
They feel loved. Yeah,
I know I do.
Yeah.
When that happens, and if that's the one thing that anyone can take away from this series, listen to others.
Helpful, yeah.
It's huge.
Yeah.
So thank you once again for being a part of this. We just encourage you again. Don't get bogged down by any kind of formula that goes on here. It's the idea of it takes time to build to a place to share values, and sometimes it's really good just for us to kind of see what that looks like a little bit laid out, so that it's like, hey, we takes time to get there. Not every relationship's going to get there. That's okay. That's just the reality of relationships. And in that, once we get there, that maybe there's a time to share that value of deep value, worldview of Jesus. Mm-hmm. And we might be surprised when it does happen. And we just encourage you to, again, go out and just, going back to the thing, just connect with those around. Mm-hmm. Be ready to listen. And you might be surprised when a coffee moment shows up. Thank you. Please like and subscribe, and we will see you next time.